Join Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson as they untangle a web of aristocratic secrets and deception, racing against time to thwart a cunning adversary bent on reviving a deadly legacy. Will the legendary duo prevent the clock from striking a fatal hour? Stay tuned as the mystery unfolds, revealing that in the world of Sherlock Holmes, not everything is as it appears. The storm had been building with an unrelenting fury over London, the wind howling as if voicing the city's hidden secrets, and rain lashed against the windows of 221B Baker Street with ferocious intent. Inside, the warm glow of a gas lamp cast a soft light over the room where Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson were ensconced in their respective pursuits. Holmes, leaning back against his chair with his fingers steepled beneath his chin, was lost in thought, gazing intently at the ceiling as though the solution to an intricate problem was written there. Watson, slightly more engaged with the earthly matters, was absorbed in a medical journal, his reading glasses perched precariously on the bridge of his nose. The clock on the mantelpiece chimed ominously, marking the late hour, yet neither man seemed inclined to retire. It was then that the night silence was abruptly shattered by a desperate knocking at the door. Holmes's eyes flickered with a hint of intrigue, and Watson, accustomed to their routine, placed his journal down with a resigned sigh. "I'll get it, Holmes," Watson muttered, unfolding himself from his chair. He wasn't entirely surprised by the interruption. Their residence at Baker Street was no stranger to late-night visitors, especially those bearing troubles of a mysterious or distressing nature. Opening the door, Watson was met by the sight of a woman, her appearance bespeaking both urgency and high breeding. Her hair, though elegantly styled, was somewhat disheveled by the wind, and her eyes, wide with a mingling of fear and determination, fixed upon Watson with an intensity that bespoke her desperate need for the detective's services. "Dr. Watson?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly from the cold, or perhaps fear. "I must speak with Mr. Holmes immediately. It is a matter of great urgency." "Please, come in," Watson said, stepping aside. He led her into the sitting room where Holmes now sat upright, his attention fully engaged. The woman took a moment to compose herself, smoothing her skirt as she took the seat Watson offered. She then turned her gaze to Holmes, who was observing her with a calculating eye. "My name is Lady Eleanor Pembroke," she began, her voice steadying as she spoke. "I find myself in a situation most distressing, and I am at my wits' end." Holmes nodded for her to continue, his demeanor calm, yet distinctly attentive. "This evening," Lady Pembroke continued, "a package was delivered to my estate. It was left at the front door, without a courier in sight. Inside the package was a clock, a rather large, ornate table clock, encased in crimson and gold. Accompanying it was a note, which read, 'Time runs out at the 11th hour.'" Watson felt a chill at her words, noticing too that Holmes's interest had visibly sharpened. "And this clock," Holmes interjected, "did it function?" "Yes, Mr. Holmes. At precisely midnight, it chimed 11 times, even though the hour was 12. The sound was not merely that of a clock striking the hour, it was haunting, almost foreboding. It filled the entire house with dread." "Interesting," Holmes murmured, his brain clearly racing through the implications. "And was there anything else unusual about this delivery, or the clock itself?" Lady Pembroke hesitated, then leaned forward, lowering her voice as though the walls themselves might overhear. "The servants are terrified. They speak of an old family legend, a curse that befell a 17th century ancestor involved in nefarious deeds. They believe this clock is a harbinger of doom, signaling the revival of old feuds and misfortunes." Holmes steepled his fingers, his eyes glinting with the thrill of the chase. "And what do you believe, Lady Pembroke?" "I do not know what to believe, Mr. Holmes. I am a rational woman, but the fear this object has instilled in my household is palpable and deeply unsettling. I need your help to unravel this mystery. Holmes rose from his chair, a decisive glint in his eye. Watson, we shall visit Pembroke Manor first thing on the morrow. It seems we have a case that involves not only the physical, but the psychological, and possibly the supernatural. Watson nodded, his medical mind intrigued by the symptoms of fear and their possible causes. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes," Lady Pembroke said, a trace of relief in her voice as she rose. "I feel a great weight lifted, knowing you are on this." As Lady Pembroke departed, the storm outside seemed to momentarily abate, as if the elements themselves were pausing in anticipation of the investigation to come. Holmes returned to his chair, already lost in thought, while Watson, knowing the adventure that awaited them, prepared himself for what was sure to be a case as chilling as it was enigmatic. The journey to Pembroke Manor the following morning was a quiet one, as both Holmes and Watson were lost in their thoughts, the carriage wheels rolling steadily beneath them. The storm had cleared, leaving in its wake a crisp, bright day that belied the tension of the task ahead. As they approached the stately home, the imposing facade of Pembroke Manor loomed, its ancient stones whispering of bygone days and deep-seated secrets. Upon their arrival, they were greeted by the butler, a solemn man named Mr. Higgins, who led them through the ornate hallways to the drawing-room where Lady Pembroke awaited. She seemed slightly more composed than the night before, but still visibly troubled. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for coming so swiftly," she greeted them, her voice echoing slightly in the grand room. "I must tell you something else that has transpired which only adds to the urgency of your investigation." Holmes raised an eyebrow, a silent prompt for her to continue. "Last night, after our meeting, one of the servants, a young footman named Michael, vanished. He was last seen heading towards the servants' quarters, but by morning he was nowhere to be found. None of the other servants have seen him since. A disappearance on top of this mysterious delivery is most troubling indeed," Holmes remarked, his mind already turning over the facts. "Tell me, was this Michael in any way unusual? Had he any grievances, or had he behaved oddly prior to his disappearance?" Lady Pembroke shook her head. "Not at all, Mr. Holmes. Michael was a very loyal and cheerful young man, well liked by everyone. His disappearance has left us all the more bewildered and frightened." Holmes nodded thoughtfully, and then stood. "With your permission, Lady Pembroke, I should like to examine the clock, and then perhaps speak to some of the staff." "Of course, Mr. Holmes. I will have Mr. Higgins show you to the clock immediately." Led by the butler, they were taken to a dimly lit study where the infamous crimson clock stood on a mantel. The clock was indeed striking in appearance, its glossy crimson veneer inlaid with intricate golden filigree that glinted in the light of the morning sun streaming through a nearby window. Holmes approached it cautiously, his eyes scanning every detail before he reached out to touch it. "Notice here, Watson," Holmes pointed out as he examined the back of the clock. "There are signs that the mechanism has been tampered with, and here traces of mercury, a substance not typically found in household clocks." "What do you make of that, Holmes?" Watson asked, peering over his shoulder. "Mercury could be used to enhance the spectral sound of the chimes, perhaps to lend them that ethereal quality Lady Pembroke described. It is clear this clock is no ordinary timepiece, and is central to the mystery at hand." Holmes then opened a small compartment in the back of the clock, and inside found a thin, almost imperceptible vial of mercury, confirming his suspicions. It seems someone went to great lengths to ensure this clock not only told time, but told it ominously. Returning to the drawing-room, Holmes requested to interview the staff. One by one, the household servants were questioned. Holmes listened intently to their accounts of the night the clock was delivered and the subsequent disappearance of Michael. All spoke highly of the missing footman, noting nothing out of the ordinary prior to his disappearance, and none could offer any explanation about the clock's origins. After the interviews, Holmes and Watson stepped aside to confer. "What strikes me as most peculiar, Watson, is not only the disappearance of the young footman, but also the palpable fear among the staff. They speak of curses and doom as if such things were as real to them as the air they breathe. Do you believe there is merit to their fears, Holmes? Could this curse they speak of be more than mere superstition?" Holmes gave a wry smile. "I have yet to encounter a curse that cannot be explained by rational means, Watson. However, the fear itself is real and can be a potent force. It is often said that fear is a kind of witchcraft. It muddles the mind and makes one see things that are not there. Then our first task is to dispel this witchcraft, Holmes, and restore reason to Pembroke Manor." "Precisely, Watson. Let us first trace the origins of this clock. That may lead us to the whereabouts of the missing footman and the heart of this mystery." As night descended upon Pembroke Manor, an eerie calm settled over the grand old house. Holmes and Watson, deciding it prudent to stay overnight, were given guest rooms that overlooked the expansive, shadow-laden gardens. While Watson found the comforts of the guest room inviting, after the day's investigations, Holmes was restless, his mind clearly still entwined with the complexities of the case. Before retiring to their rooms, they joined Lady Pembroke for dinner, which was a quiet affair, punctuated by the occasional clink of silverware and the distant rumble of thunder. The atmosphere was tense, each sound seeming louder and more ominous than usual. Post-dinner, Holmes suggested a walk through the manor to observe the setting more closely under the guise of aiding digestion. Watson knew better than to assume this was anything but an extension of Holmes's investigative process. As they wandered through the dimly lit hallways, Watson noticed the way the shadows seemed to flicker and dance on the walls, cast by the flickering candles. It was then that Holmes suddenly paused, tilting his head slightly, as if he heard something beyond the range of normal hearing. "Do you hear that, Watson?" Holmes whispered, his voice barely audible. Watson strained his ears, and after a moment he too could hear it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound that seemed like a mixture of scraping and tapping coming from the end of the corridor. Without a word, Holmes gestured for Watson to follow, and they made their way towards the sound. As they approached, the noise ceased abruptly, and they found themselves outside the library. Holmes carefully opened the door, but the room was empty, the only movement that of the curtains billowing slightly from a night breeze. "It seems we've lost whatever it was," Watson said, a hint of disappointment in his voice. "On the contrary, my dear Watson, it has only just begun to reveal itself," Holmes replied, his eyes scanning the room. "Let us wait here for a moment." They stood in silence, the tension palpable. After a few minutes, a soft thud came from somewhere within the room. Holmes swiftly moved towards the sound, his steps silent. Watson watched as Holmes approached a large bookcase, his fingers deftly exploring the wooden frame. Suddenly, Holmes pressed a small, almost invisible lever, and the bookcase swung open, revealing a narrow, hidden passage. "Ah, what have we here?" Holmes murmured, his face lit by the thrill of discovery. With only the light of a single candle to guide them, Holmes and Watson entered the passage. The air grew cooler as they proceeded, the walls closing in around them until they emerged into a small, secret room. The room was filled with old ledgers, maps, and various documents strewn about, as if someone had recently been searching through them. "This appears to be a hidden study, or perhaps a place of safekeeping," Holmes observed, examining the contents of the room. "Someone in this house has secrets worth concealing." As they searched the room, Watson noticed another piece of parchment, this one fresher than the others. He picked it up and read the message scrawled in a hurried, almost frantic hand. "You cannot turn back the hands of fate." "Holmes, look at this," Watson said, handing the note to Holmes. Holmes took the parchment, his eyes narrowing as he read. "This message, combined with our midnight encounter, suggests that someone within these walls is driving the fear surrounding the Pembroke curse. They spent a few more minutes examining the hidden room, finding little else of immediate relevance. As they made their way back to the main part of the manor, Holmes was thoughtful, his mind clearly piecing together the clues they had uncovered. "The game is afoot, Watson," Holmes finally said as they reached the corridor. "We have stumbled upon a conspiracy that ties the past to the present, and it is far more tangible than any spectral apparition or family curse." With new evidence in hand and their course set, they returned to their rooms knowing that the shadows held more than just darkness. They held the key to solving the mystery of Pembroke Manor. The following morning, after a brief and somewhat tense breakfast with Lady Pembroke, Holmes and Watson returned to the hidden room discovered the night before. The daylight did little to dispel the room's secretive aura, its walls lined with ledgers and dust-laden scrolls that spoke of centuries past. Holmes, with a meticulousness that Watson had come to admire, began examining the contents of the room more thoroughly. Each ledger and letter was carefully inspected, with Holmes occasionally muttering to himself or making notes in his pocketbook. Watson, while less adept at deciphering the aged handwriting of the Pembroke ancestors, focused on the maps and portraits that adorned the room's walls. It was during this examination that he uncovered a framed genealogy chart hidden behind a faded painting of the Pembroke estate. The chart detailed the Pembroke lineage, with various notes scribbled in the margins. "Look here, Holmes," Watson called out, gesturing to the chart. "It appears the Pembrokes have been entangled with another family, the Redferns, for generations." Holmes joined Watson at the wall, his keen eyes scanning the genealogy. "Ah, yes, the Redferns. I recall a passing mention of them in one of the ledgers. It seems there was a long-standing feud, something about a disputed inheritance." The detective turned his attention back to a stack of letters he had been examining. He carefully selected one and handed it to Watson. "This letter, dated some 200 years ago, speaks to that very feud. It mentions a grievous betrayal that led to a blood debt that the Redferns vowed to repay. The implications of such a feud cast a shadow over their investigation, suggesting that the curse and the Crimson Clock might be rooted in a very real and very dangerous historical conflict. Now, let us consider the implications of this blood debt," Holmes mused, pacing the length of the room. "If the descendants of the Redferns are still seeking retribution, it could very well explain the recent events here at Pembroke Manor." "But would a feud that old really carry over to the present day?" Watson asked, skepticism in his tone. Holmes stopped pacing and fixed Watson with a meaningful look. "Never underestimate the power of a long-standing family grudge, Watson. It can simmer beneath the surface for generations, only to erupt when the conditions are ripe." With this new hypothesis in mind, Holmes proposed a plan to delve deeper into the Redfern connection. "We must gather more information about the current Redferns. If they are indeed behind this, there will be evidence linking them to the clock, and perhaps even to the disappearance of the footman Michael." They spent the remainder of the morning in the secret room, compiling a list of names, dates, and possible contacts who could provide insight into the Redfern family's current status and activities. By midday, they had a clear course of action. Holmes decided to send telegrams to several of his informants in London, requesting any available information on the Redferns. Meanwhile, he suggested that they revisit the staff and inquire more directly about any recent interactions with the Redfern family or any unknown visitors to the manor. As they prepared to leave the secret room, Holmes paused by the door, his hand on the frame. "This case, Watson, it intertwines the past and the present in ways that are seldom seen. We are not merely uncovering a simple act of theft or malice, but perhaps revealing the dark heart of a century-old vendetta." With a determined nod, Watson followed Holmes out of the room. The weight of history was upon them, and the day promised to bring them closer to either a resolution or further entanglement in the Pembroke Redfern legacy. As the day waned into a dusky evening, Holmes and Watson continued their inquiries around Pembroke Manor. They had spent the afternoon interviewing the household staff once again, this time focusing on any recent interactions with the Redferns or unusual visitors. The staff remained tight-lipped, either out of fear or loyalty, but their anxiety was palpable, suggesting that they too felt the undercurrents of danger swirling about the estate. While returning to the main house from the stables, where they had been questioning the coachman about recent deliveries and visitors, Watson spotted a figure in the distance. The man, cloaked and moving furtively among the shadows of the garden's ancient trees, seemed to be making his way toward the back entrance of the manor. "Holmes, look there!" Watson whispered urgently, nodding toward the mysterious figure. Holmes's eyes narrowed as he observed the cloaked man. "Quickly, Watson, we mustn't lose him. He could be the key to unraveling this entire affair." They hastened their pace, their footsteps silent on the soft earth. As they neared, the figure seemed to sense pursuit and quickened his stride, his cloak billowing behind him. Despite their best efforts to move quietly, a twig snapped under Watson's foot, and the figure broke into a run. A chase ensued, with Holmes and Watson darting through the garden's labyrinthine pathways, the silhouette of the man just ahead. The pursuit led them to a thick copse of trees at the edge of the property, where the man's cloak snagged on a branch, slowing him momentarily. This allowed Holmes and Watson to close the distance. Just as they were nearly upon him, the man turned and threw something at them. It was a small, smoke-filled glass sphere that shattered on the ground, enveloping Holmes and Watson in a thick, disorienting fog. Coughing and trying to wave the smoke away, they heard the rustling of leaves as the man escaped. Once the smoke cleared, Holmes knelt to examine the remnants of the glass sphere. Phosphorus? Used to create a smokescreen. Clever, Holmes remarked, his eyes scanning the ground for any other clues the man might have left behind. Despite the setback, the encounter was not fruitless. As Holmes inspected the area where the man had been detained by the branch, he discovered a piece of fabric torn from the cloak. "A distinctive weave," Holmes noted, holding the fabric up to the fading light. "Not common. This could very well help us identify our mysterious visitor." As they made their way back to the manor, Holmes mulled over the events. The timing of this man's appearance, just as we are delving into the Redfern connection, is exceedingly suspicious. It suggests that whoever he is, he's quite concerned with our investigation. Watson, still catching his breath from the chase, nodded in agreement. Could he be a Redfern? Possibly, or at least someone connected to them. This cloak fragment and his use of a smokescreen device indicate a level of preparedness and resourcefulness that suggests significant stakes, Holmes speculated. Back at the manor, Holmes dispatched a message to his tailor in London, sending along the fabric sample. "If this cloak was tailored, my contact might trace where it was made. It's a long shot, but every clue must be followed." That evening, as Holmes and Watson discussed their next steps, another disturbing element was added to the mystery. The butler delivered a new message that had been found pinned to the front door of the manor. It read, "Time is a weapon. Beware the 11th hour." The note was unsigned but carried the same ominous tone as the previous communications. "The plot thickens, Watson," Holmes remarked dryly, examining the note. "Our adversary is bold, and the message clear. We are running out of time. We must act swiftly." Watson felt a chill run down his spine as he pondered the meaning of the message. The 11th hour was fast approaching, and with it perhaps a resolution to the mystery of Pembroke Manor, for better or worse. The following morning, Holmes and Watson made their way into the village near Pembroke Manor to follow up on the lead provided by the cloak's distinctive fabric. As they walked, Holmes was unusually quiet, deep in thought, his brow furrowed with the complexity of the case. Upon reaching the village, their first stop was the local tailor, whom Holmes questioned about the fabric. The tailor, a meticulous man with an eye for detail, confirmed the fabric was indeed rare, imported from France, and sold to very few in the area. "Can you recall who purchased this fabric?" Holmes inquired, his tone insistent yet polite. The tailor rifled through his records before responding, "Ah, yes, a gentleman by the name of Mr. Alfred Redfern. He requested a cloak made from this very fabric some months ago." Watson and Holmes exchanged a significant glance. The Redfern connection was becoming increasingly undeniable. "Thank you. You have been most helpful," Holmes said as they left the tailor shop. Outside, Holmes paused, his gaze lingering on the streets bustling with villagers. "Watson, our next course of action is to visit the local chemist. The phosphorus used in the smoke bomb must have come from somewhere, and a small village like this is unlikely to have many sources for such chemicals." At the chemist's shop, a small bell jingled as they entered. The chemist, a balding man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, greeted them warmly. Holmes wasted no time, showing the chemist a sketch of the glass sphere and describing the chemicals involved. The chemist nodded, recognizing the description. "Yes, I recall selling phosphorus and a few other chemicals to a man who was keen on experimenting with alchemy. He said something about recreating historical experiments." "Do you know the man's name or anything about him?" Holmes asked, his keen eyes watching the chemist closely. "He never gave his name, sir, but he was well-spoken and had a gentleman's bearing. Quite secretive about his purposes, though. Came in here about a fortnight ago." Holmes thanked the chemist and stepped outside the shop, his mind clearly processing the new information. "Alchemy, Watson. Our mysterious figure has an interest in historical sciences. This aligns curiously with the nature of the feud based on ancient grievances. They decided to visit the local library to research any historical alchemical practices in the region that might connect to the Pembrokes or the Redferns. The librarian, intrigued by their request, directed them to a collection of local historical records. As Holmes and Watson pored over the dusty tomes and papers, Holmes's finger suddenly stopped on a page. "Here, Watson, look at this." He pointed to an old manuscript detailing a notorious alchemist known to have connections with the Redfern family in the 17th century. The manuscript mentioned experiments with time perception and fear-inducing concoctions. "This is most enlightening," Holmes mused. "Our adversary uses the cloak and phosphorus as tools of fear, much like an alchemist from the past might use his concoctions to awe and terrify." Watson, looking over the manuscript, added, "It seems this feud and its methods are steeped in much older traditions than we realized." Armed with this new understanding, Holmes and Watson returned to Pembroke Manor to confront Lady Pembroke with their findings. They found her in the drawing room, looking more anxious than ever. "Lady Pembroke, we have uncovered significant connections between the Redferns and ancient alchemical practices." Holmes began detailing their discoveries. "It appears that the current events may be the result of this deep-rooted legacy." Lady Pembroke listened intently, her face pale. "What can we do, Mr. Holmes? How do we stop this from escalating further?" Holmes's expression was grave but resolute. "Tonight, we must catch our alchemist in the act. We shall lay a trap, and with your help, we will end this once and for all." As dusk fell over Pembroke Manor, Holmes, Watson, and a very determined Lady Pembroke prepared for what they hoped would be the final act in the haunting drama that had enveloped the estate. The atmosphere at Pembroke Manor was tense as nightfall approached, casting long shadows across the ornate halls and aging portraits. Sherlock Holmes, Dr. John Watson, and Lady Pembroke gathered in the study, finalizing their plans for the evening. Holmes had laid out a meticulous strategy, each detail crafted with his characteristic precision. "As the clock approaches 11, I suspect our elusive alchemist will make his move," Holmes explained, his eyes sharp and focused. "He seems to thrive on the symbolic significance of time, and the 11th hour has been a recurring theme in his messages." Lady Pembroke nodded, her expression resolute, yet tinged with apprehension. "What do you require of me, Mr. Holmes?" "You must be the bait, Lady Pembroke," Holmes said gently, understanding the weight of his request. "You will act as if tonight is like any other, retiring to your room at the usual hour. Watson and I will be in hiding, ready to apprehend our suspect when he reveals himself." Lady Pembroke agreed, her courage fortified by the desire to see an end to the threats that had plagued her family. With the plan set, Watson checked his service revolver while Holmes reviewed the positions they would take within the manor. The clock's hands moved inexorably towards 11 as the house settled into a quiet unease. Holmes and Watson concealed themselves in adjacent rooms with a clear view of the hallway leading to Lady Pembroke's bedroom, where the final confrontation was expected to occur. Minutes ticked by, each second stretching longer than the last, until the distant chimes of the clock began to sound, reverberating through the silent manor. The haunting tones of the 11th strike had barely faded when a subtle disturbance, a slight creak of a floorboard, signaled that someone was approaching. Peering from his hiding spot, Holmes observed a shadowy figure dressed in a dark cloak, moving with deliberate stealth towards Lady Pembroke's room. As the figure reached the door and gently turned the handle, Holmes and Watson sprang from their concealment. "Stay where you are," Holmes commanded, his voice calm but authoritative. The figure halted, caught by surprise, and slowly turned to face the detectives, the light revealing his features. It was Mr. Alfred Redfern, his expression a mixture of shock and defiance. Holmes stepped forward, his demeanor unyielding. "Mr. Redfern, I presume? We have been expecting you." Redfern's composure cracked, and his shoulders slumped in resignation. "Holmes, you do not understand," he began, his voice tinged with desperation. "This has always been about justice, about righting a wrong so old that it has poisoned generations." Holmes listened intently but remained skeptical. "And you chose to exact this justice through fear and manipulation? There are lawful ways to resolve disputes, Mr. Redfern." Redfern shook his head, a bitter smile playing on his lips. "The law has never favored us, not since the Pembrokes betrayed our ancestors. This was the only way to make them feel the depth of our despair." Holmes's gaze never wavered. "And what of the young footman, Michael? Was he a casualty of your vendetta?" Regret flashed across Redfern's face. "He discovered my identity by accident. I had no choice but to confine him. He is unharmed, I assure you." With Redfern's admission, Watson moved to secure him, while Holmes communicated quietly with the local constabulary to retrieve Michael and take Redfern into custody. As the ordeal drew to a close, Lady Pembroke entered the hallway, relief evident on her face. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I cannot thank you enough. Tonight, you have lifted a terrible burden from Pembroke Manor." Holmes offered her a reassuring nod. "It is our duty, Lady Pembroke. Justice, truth, and peace must always prevail over shadows and fears." With Redfern in custody and the mystery unraveled, the manor slowly began to return to normalcy. However, the echoes of the past would linger a bit longer, a reminder of the deep-seated grievances that had almost torn a family apart. Holmes and Watson, satisfied with their resolution of the case, prepared to return to London, their partnership strengthened by yet another shared adventure into the darker corners of human history and emotion. The morning light streamed through the windows of Pembroke Manor, casting gentle patterns on the floors and walls, and touching the faces of those gathered in the drawing room with a soft warmth. Lady Pembroke, Sherlock Holmes, and Dr. John Watson sat with cups of tea, reflecting on the events of the night before. "The local police have taken Mr. Redfern into custody, and young Michael has been found safe, albeit a bit shaken from his ordeal," Holmes began, breaking the morning's silence. "He was confined in an old cellar, used long ago for storing wine. Thankfully, he is unharmed and will be returning to his duties soon, should he choose." Lady Pembroke sighed, a mixture of relief and sorrow. "It is a great comfort to know the matter is resolved, yet it is tragic that such familial bitterness led to this. Mr. Holmes, however can I thank you?" Holmes waved away her gratitude with a modest hand. "It is all in a day's work for us, Lady Pembroke. However, ensuring that such a feud does not arise again might be worth looking into." Watson nodded in agreement. "Perhaps this is an opportunity for reconciliation, or at least a détente, between the remaining members of the Pembroke and Redfern families." "Yes, I believe you are right, Dr. Watson," Lady Pembroke replied thoughtfully. "I must consider how best to extend an olive branch to the Redferns, despite everything. It is what my ancestors should have done long ago." Holmes looked pleased with her response. "A wise decision, Lady Pembroke. It is often these old wounds, left to fester, that create the monsters we later fear the most." With the formalities winding down, Holmes and Watson prepared to leave Pembroke Manor. As they gathered their belongings, Holmes paused by the crimson clock, which had been the harbinger of all the recent turmoil. He studied it for a moment, contemplative. "An interesting object, Watson," Holmes remarked, "but I believe the manor would be better off without it. It may be prudent to remove it, lest it become a symbol of fear once more." Lady Pembroke agreed, and instructed the butler to have the clock stored away in the attic, perhaps eventually to be forgotten. As they stepped outside, the fresh country air seemed to cleanse the last remnants of the mystery they had unraveled. Holmes took a deep breath, looking out towards the horizon. "The human psyche is much like these rolling hills, Watson. There are valleys and peaks, hidden views and obvious ones. Our job is often to navigate these landscapes, bringing clarity to the obscured sights." Watson smiled, recording this moment in his mind for a future retelling. "And what a navigation it has been, Holmes. From a mysterious crimson clock to a family feud centuries old." "Yes, indeed," Holmes said as they walked towards the carriage, waiting to take them back to London. "And let us hope our next adventure is as stimulating, but perhaps a bit less ominous." With that, the carriage rolled away from Pembroke Manor, leaving behind the shadows of the past, now dispelled by the light of truth and reconciliation. Watson glanced back once, thinking about the manuscript of their adventures he would soon pen. This case, with its deep emotional currents and dramatic resolution, would make a fine chapter, a testament to the enduring partnership between Sherlock Holmes and himself, and to their unending quest to bring light to the darkest mysteries. Join Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson as they untangle a web of aristocratic secrets and deception, racing against time to thwart a cunning adversary bent on reviving a deadly legacy. Will the legendary duo prevent the clock from striking a fatal hour? Stay tuned as the mystery unfolds, revealing that in the world of Sherlock Holmes, not everything is as it appears.